Hey, it's Drew. And I'm guessing that as a podcast listener, you also enjoy audiobooks. Well, in that case, did you know the audio version of Renegade Marketing 12 Steps to Building Unbeatable B2B Brands was recently ranked the number one new B2B audio book by B2B Authority? Kind of cool, right? Anyway, you can find my book on Audible or your favorite audiobook platform. And speaking of audio, before we get into today's show, I do want to do a shout out to the professionals at Share Your Genius. We started working with them several months ago to make this show even better and have been blown away by their strategic and executional prowess. If you're thinking about starting a podcast or want to turbocharge your current show, be sure to talk to Rachel Downey at shareyourgenius.com and tell her Drew sent you. Okay, let's get on with today's episode. Hi, everyone. It's Drew. In this episode, we're going to re-air one of my favorite Renegade Marketers Unite episodes of all time. For episode 100, I sat down with my dad and my hero, Carl Neisser. He was 90 years old at the time, and we talked about all the lessons he'd collected over the years, like how to master the long-lost art of listening, how to build strong and meaningful relationships, and how to be endlessly curious. My dad was the best man at my wedding for the simple reason that he was the best man in my life. He was always inspiring to me, and our interview is evidence of the amazing things he had to share with the world. We lost my dad this year on March 8th, 2023, at 96 and 2/3 years of age. It's been tough, and my brothers and I know full well how lucky we were to have such a wonderful person in our lives for so long. His was a life well lived, and I miss him something awful. So here's to my dad and his memory, and of the many things to learn in this episode. A key one is find a loved one and listen to them with all your heart. So I've been thinking about what to do for episode 100 for quite a while now. In fact, probably one could argue for 99 episodes. And it happens that my father is in town. And I thought, well, he's 92. Plus 8, we're at 100.
Now, who's counting, for heaven's sakes? Come on.
So I wanted to introduce you to my dad, who also happens to be one of my heroes. And you've heard me talk about Ben Franklin. Well,
Jesus.
Yeah.
Andrew, if I can be in the Ben Franklin category.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
Just so you know, my father was the best man at my wedding, and one of the humans that I admire most on the planet. And had a very interesting career, not in marketing, although he does come from a marketer. Didn't your father work in the advertising business?
He certainly did. Formed his own advertising company with a partner right in the Depression.
Right, 1929 we looked up yesterday.
We did. We did a lot of significant research, Andrew.
We did. What we learned was that Neisser Meyerhoff, a Milwaukee agency, was formed in 1929. And then they won the Wrigley business in...
I think it was like 32 or 33.
33, at least according to my friends at Ad Age. Anyway, funny enough, as we were researching this on my dad's father, there's a legend in the family that sometime in the late 1930s, early 1940s, his doctor said to him, Walter, this business is going to kill you. You better get out of it.
Got to get out.
Right.
Or it's just too much. The partner was too tough.
So we also learned in our reading that they had the Wrigley business. They were in the Wrigley building, like an in-house agency. Can you imagine?
Yeah, and Cub tickets, Andrew. Come on.
They had a lot of good things going over there at Neisser Meyerhoff. But the thing that I read or sort of saw is that they lost one part of the Wrigley business, the doublemint business, in 1940, and I could just see your father like just grimacing and thinking, I got to get out of this.
Yeah.
And maybe that was what it is. Anyway, he split ways and left in 1941.
And went to a client, which is very common.
Yeah, well, sure enough, so my grandfather had the good sense to go client side.
That's what it was.
And worked for Weilers. And so my dad, anyway, not a marketer, but one of the things, he worked for Beckman for 24 years in a number of expanding leadership positions. And we were talking earlier just about some of the best people that you worked for and talking about leadership and some of the people that you admired as leaders. Maybe you want to share one of those folks.
One guy early on, probably in 53 or 54, Bob Chase, head of manufacturing. I'm running production control, which is a nothing today.
I would think there'd be people who would be responsible for controlling production.
Come on, no. And Andrew, the key thing there was for me to keep 3 weeks of every part on the shelf. So now we're on just in time, which is totally the opposite. Anyway, this guy said to me, now, Carl, when you tell me that shipment is going on Tuesday, if it's not going, I want to hear on Sunday or Monday. None of this stuff on Tuesday, because I'm making the commitment to the client.
You know, it's funny as you're saying that now, it reminds me, any of you who run your own company or run a small business, or even some of our clients, I wouldn't describe as small business, use the book Traction in the Entrepreneur's Operating System. And one of the key parts of that is what's called the accountability chart. And what you're describing is a boss who held you accountable. And I think that for the most part, any of us in our careers always sort of appreciated bosses who did that. It's so much easier.
Yeah, and then when I'm managing people, if they're coming back to me with mishy-mashy answers, you're really annoyed. In fact, you go after them till you get, come on, when, what time, when is it going to happen?
So if you're a chief marketing officer, certainly holding your employees accountable and for certain goals. One of the things that's so challenging in that position is what are the goals of the marketing department and the organization and making sure that they get the right things done. Were there any circumstances along in your career where you felt like you had a boss who wasn't necessarily, sort of didn't have his eye on the right prize?
Yeah, no, certainly had some of those, certainly. And not as good as Bob Chase, not as good.
Yeah, who really, who not only held you accountable, but did so in a way that you felt was good for the organization. Okay. We were talking about leadership on a much broader level, and that got us to Lincoln. And we both are big fans of Team of Rivals. And what that conversation reminded us of, and maybe you can speak to what you admired about Lincoln and his cabinet.
Well, The Team of Rivals is such a good book because 3 or 4 of those guys were also running against him before, key competitors, and really sort of walk into the job thinking he's a rail splitter and maybe a pretty good joke teller, but not much else.
Right.
And as they work with him and they see his patience and his ability and his sense of humor, I'm going to say by the 3rd or 4th inning at least, they recognize this guy is just one hell of a leader.
And I think
that's a total turnaround.
Oh yeah, and what the lesson? It's funny. I mean, and you'll find this in any book, whether it's good or great, getting the right people on the bus or the entrepreneur's operating system, making sure that you have the right people in the right slots. But I think for a chief marketing officer in particular, thinking about they are only as good as their 2 direct reports or their 4 direct reports is really so important. And so it's not only just getting the job, if you want to succeed, obviously, you're no stronger than the best or weakest people that you have working for you.
On your team, and team seems to be the key thing these days. Do you really have a team where 1 + 1 + 1 = 10, or sometimes, and I went through that, where 1 + 1 = -2. People are not working together.
So
everybody for the same pay in the same situation, it's attitude.
And so what do you think, as someone who managed a lot of people, what kinds of things did you do to try to build a team?
Continual contact with each one of them, listening. That just is almost a lost art. Listening carefully and trying to solve and help them and be on their team.
So it's funny, I can add some editorial because he is my father, and I have to say that I've always admired your the way you question and ask people, but you do listen more, and probably more. I know lots of people who listen, but very few people remember all the things that you remember from listening, and that's a tribute to.
And you usually say when you're in an interview, if you or I am doing 90% of the talking, you're going to lose. But if you can get the other person going, and you've done some homework, and you show the interest in their particular situation, that really helps you along.
So if you spend any time with my dad, which I strongly encourage all of you to figure out how to do it.
Well, I have limited time and my charges are heavy.
You will find that he will start a conversation with just about anybody and always knows the girls, the check casher or the dry cleaner or whatever. And he often knows more about them than they know about you.
I'd admit that's typical, and you like to accomplish that.
So, but you have many friends as a result. So, anyway, this was an interesting little exercise into looking at leadership, a very different conversation than we've had at Renegade Thinkers Unite. So I said, what do you want to talk about next? And he said, well, let's talk about sports. And I said, well, in what context? And it was in the context of team. So one of your first sort of big accomplishments was on a team. Didn't you win like a doubles championship in state of Illinois at one point in your life?
Good memory. That was a long time ago.
It might have been.
And that was with, and I always say that has to do with your partner. And I had a really good partner, Charlie Schaff, who was 2 years younger and twice as good as I was.
So you chose well.
I chose well. And at 75, I took up handball. And I always said it made good sense to have a younger partner. And he was 73.
So when we talk about sports, it's a metaphor that's used a lot in business and so forth. From your experience, I remember I learned tennis from my father, and he always talked about how you could learn a lot by how someone behaved, about them based on how they behaved on the tennis court. But talk to me about how you see teamwork and sports as something that helps train and prepare someone for business.
Yeah. Well, certainly the first thing is really being a very good member of that team and reaching out to the other team members who respond to you and getting this sort of synergism working on your team, that I'm for you, you're for me, and rewarding a good play. And if the guy makes an error, forget that. Let's go on to the next bit. You don't want to dwell on that error at all.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that a singles tennis player really has to deal with is moving on, and the ability to just sort of keep going in a match and in business and
in marketing. Come on.
Yep.
How many no's do you get before you get that yes? So you just got to adjust to those.
It's true. But I like what you were saying about building the notion of teamwork. But you've always been someone who, I'm going to invest in you first. And that attitude, I think, is one that clients and companies are trying very hard to do with their customers. Is they're saying, I want to think about my customer. I want to be customer centric. But I also think in many ways they still just want to sell stuff. And those two things often come into conflict.
They can, or a good leader can pretty well keep from that conflict from happening or minimize it.
Right, because what we can focus on the prize and how we define what success looks like.
Yep,
now,
totally.
At sports, it's in some sense it's easier because you have a winner and a loser, but I don't know if that's a problematic metaphor for business, because there are lots of winners.
Oh yeah,
it's not a zero-sum game.
No.
So
and so many people do not realize when they look at a big company making profits that there were 10 that just didn't make it in that business to let this one come through and be really successful. It is a tough kind of a situation, and a lot of them just fall by the wayside.
Through a lack of vision, a lack of leadership, a lack of common goals, and so forth, the kind of thing that you find on a winning team.
That's correct. Absolutely. My L.A. Dodgers.
Your L.A. Dodgers. How are your Dodgers doing this year?
Just marginally. Marginally.
Yeah, well, the Yankees aren't doing that much better, but by the time this episode airs, that will be...
we hope so.
We'll be in October, so hopefully we're still talking...
especially if we go to church and do the right thing on Sunday.
Yeah,
come on.
Well, speak for yourself there. Okay, I'm going to switch gears here for a second. Let's talk about one of the things. So people have asked me what my dad did, and for the last, I'm going to have to say, 20 plus years, I have described you as the man with the golden Rolodex. You've lived in Newport Beach in Orange County since 1957. That's all. That's all.
Yep.
Long time, and you know a tremendous amount of people and have done a lot. But you found a way to just stay connected. Let's talk about networking and how you approach that and building a network and maintaining these relationships.
Well, and as I was saying to you earlier this morning, I'll really try to keep up with lunches and breakfasts. And then you said, how many do you kick out? Or how many do you go after, and how many people really call me? Well, it's probably easily 85% I institute. Right. But it's one call, and most of them are expecting that. We've had that for years. Sure, Carl, where do we go? Well, we got 2 favorite restaurants, and it works out very nicely.
And you, as you're talking to these folks, always sort of, because you're inquisitive, sort of ask, in one way, how can I help you? And so many of these folks, you've connected with other people and brought them together.
Well, you just sort of, as you're listening, you're taking in a lot of information about your guest or your network person, and you're thinking of, or something comes up and you think, wait a minute, Joe could really help this guy. And then I call Joe and get them together. And that's a lot of satisfaction, hopefully helpful for both parties.
And because you've maintained this network, you can call Joe and say, hey, Joe, I've got this one for you to consider. They're not going to say, gosh, Carl, this is the 10th.
Just the opposite,
right.
Because you've built a reputation.
Right. And
they trust. To me, Andrew, the 5-letter word trust is still the key thing in business.
It is, and it's funny you should say that, because we've been working on a video recently for one of our clients in that area, and it's such an interesting word, and it is such an intangible, except for this: I either trust you or I don't, really, and earning trust is not something that you can do by saying something.
No, you put your finger on it. You earn that, and as such, when you're starting with a new client and it feels wrong, usually it can only go further south, so you don't take him on. Right. And I'm finding more and more people really, especially in marketing, react that way.
Right, and so you pick people to do business with that will be good customers. Funny, I was reading I don't know what I was reading, but it was a really interesting blog post somewhere, and it was an article on trust, because I'm researching that, and the person was talking about how a startup needs to pick their first 100 customers really carefully, because if they don't absolutely love everything about that company,
you're in the toilet.
You're kind of in trouble. And I thought, wow, that's a really profound notion. And the notion is just staying focused. If you want to earn trust, you want to earn trust of the right people. You can't possibly today earn trust of everyone in the marketplace, right? I mean,
no way. And I'm thinking, Andrew, of my last 15 to 20 years where I had my own business, would take on a couple of very special clients who trusted me and were really working with me because of my reputation that I had earned for many years in Orange County, California. So when I said to them, I think, or when I would introduce them to people that I knew who might be their client. And because I had known these people for a long time, they'd come in, we'd go together, and some of those things really fit. And it made sense, and it was based on reputation and trust.
And if you introduce someone to the wrong person, or the person that you introduced them to ended up being somebody that wasn't trustworthy, that would have...
The whole thing's out.
Right.
It's done. You're through.
And that's problematic. So I think it's, I think I wrote a line the other day, is like, it takes a lifetime of consistent activity to earn trust, and a New York minute to lose it.
True. Oh, yeah.
But I think that over dramatizes it. It's funny. So I had a call from my daughter who was having a big problem with American. She couldn't get back from the Iowa, and she said, American's the worst. And I'm thinking about all the collective experiences that I've had with American over the last 30, 40 years. And you know what? They put some credit in the Goodwill Bank, so I will give them some slack. She's only had that one experience.
Yeah,
And for if she could help it, she would never.
Well, 10 or 15 years from now, when you have her on this podcast, she'll be much further down the road.
Well, we'll see. I'd love to have her on the podcast. My daughter works for Facebook, and
that's tops.
And
tops.
I would love to have her on the show. I don't know if they'll let her, but if we can do that, then we could have an all family episode.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about more Neisser stuff. Have you thought about doing some market research but didn't have the manpower or expertise on your team to make sure your research was methodologically valid, insight-rich, and newsworthy? Research that can be a tent pole for an entire quarter's worth of marketing activities? Research that your SDRs can use to help move a lead into a genuine opportunity? It's a lot to ask for market research, which is why more and more marketers are coming to Renegade for help in this area. Renegade will help you craft the questionnaire, field the research, analyze the results, and even write up and design the report if your in-house team is too busy. If you're a B2B CMO even thinking about market research, do yourself a favor, visit renegade.com and set up a time for us to chat. All right, we're back. I'm here with Carl Neisser, my father, and we've talked about networking and building relationships and earning trust, which certainly is a fundamental part of any business. And
there's a weeding process in that. You've met some people that you don't trust or you're just a little fuzzy with, and they do not go in the network that you really count on.
And it's that's interesting because you think about a lifetime of a network and the value of that lifetime. And it's funny, I get any number of requests for connections on LinkedIn, and I apologize if you're one of those listening and I haven't responded yet. But I really do try when someone says, "Hey, Drew," and they have a very specific question about something or a connection that I have. I really do try to help them, if assuming that I can. Now, when I don't get 1,000 of those, which is good,
right.
But I have never once felt like, oh, I can't waste my time doing this, because it's never a waste of time, because the boomerang effect is huge.
No, and I'm thinking as I call to make my dates that usually the gatekeeper, the gal who puts the person through to who I want, I know personally, we've talked before, "Oh, Carl, sure, I'll get him on the line right away." And that's just helpful to really work those people right into your system.
And, it's funny, you're using the term phone and phone calls, and I do have some millennial listeners, and, if we want to reach your grandkids, the best way to do it is with texting, maybe email. But phone calls are an anathema to them. Just to pick up the phone and call them is not something that they would think about. And I wrote an article recently on high-tech, high-touch, and this was something that Alvin Toffler talked about in 1970 with Future Shock. As technology sort of took over our lives, we'd have more of a need for human connections. And not to get all heady here, but ironically, a phone and the contact that you have with somebody over a phone call is so much more meaningful than
the text or the email.
The text or the email, and I worry that the art of the phone call, just like the art of the letter, are things that I don't worry, but I might lament those things are just going by the wayside.
And they may be. And they may be when you think of how communications has changed in the last 20 years. Totally.
So,
What, you didn't have a fax machine? Come on.
I know, it's funny. Now we don't have a fax machine, so it just goes through this whole cycle. So as we think about some big lessons of your life, and really for a moment think about them in terms of people that you admire and...
Well, I'll pick one real quickly.
Yes.
Into each life a marine must fall. What really makes the person, in my mind, is having had and gone through successfully and come out of some very serious problems of their own. To me, somebody who says, Andrew, I've never had a failure, everything has been all the way up, does not make sense, hasn't been exposed a lot. So you have to overcome those tough times and come back out of it.
Well, it also, if you happen to have a number of tough times, you really do appreciate the times when it's not tough.
Oh, absolutely. And from a marketing standpoint, this is really saying you've had quite a few no's. Some of them have been really tough, but you come right back and go on to the next person.
So we're really talking about weebles, weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. Here, that's a reference to a toy for those of you who don't remember weebles. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's a really important comment. I don't think anybody goes and looks for adversity. I don't think anybody necessarily does it, although I think that if you're a senior marketer and you're thinking about your next step, certainly taking on a challenge that you may not think you're prepared for is not necessarily a dumb idea. We're not saying go out and fail.
No.
On purpose, but certainly the setbacks and the application of that today that you're describing is learn, fail fast, learn from your failures, test. I mean, one of the things that we talk about here a lot at Renegade, look, if you're not taking a risk, you're probably A, not learning, B, you're not going to be succeeding.
Yeah.
Because if there is no playing it safe.
And Andrew, in marketing, when you would say to me, you've got some stuff in the pipeline, if you got 3 good ones, I think you'll get 1 through. But if that pipeline is 1 only, odds are poor, or just extending that.
Right, particularly if we bring that focus, both in terms of what it is that you do and who it is that you're talking to. I think I heard recently that the definition of marketing is presenting yourself in such a way that the customer just sort of buys you. Your service just sort of sells itself. That was, I think, Drucker.
I think that's really very, and that goes back to trust, because you've gone through the rough times, you've had those, you've pursued those, and you're beyond those. So you say to Joe, if you say that's it, I'm going with you.
So as you're talking and informed by this, one of the things that I admire about my dad is that every year he usually has a list of things that he wants to do that year, and always it includes some new technology thing. And he'll call me on New Year's Day, said this year it's So,
well, and this year it's the dial phone.
right, but and I have friends who are a little bit older than I who just can't be bothered to learn an app or can't be bothered to.
Or in my generation, too many just say, I can't do the computer.
Right.
And I say to them, my God, you did the stick shift? This is no more difficult.
But here's the thing, you never stop learning. You never stop being curious, and so if you had and you would never be one to advise someone how to live to have a life well lived.
Well, you hit a key point. Every single day is a learning day, and unfortunately, even at my age, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And that is a sad situation.
It's really painful. It really is. Yeah, it's true. Each book is sort of like if you read every book in a library, the next thing you open up a door and there's just a whole nother set of books to read.
Yeah, and you thought you were finished.
Yeah, I thought I had this one down. But I want just to sort of homage is that so last year I think you said, all right, I want to get texting. The year before it was Facebook. The year before it was the ESPN app and so forth. But you can imagine if you did this every year and you kept adding something new and kept reading and staying curious, it seems like it enriches your life. You're in a book club too, right?
Oh, we've had a wonderful men's book club for 16 years, where we meet 11 times a year, Andrew, dark in December, and we have a wonderful format where we meet at the host's house promptly at 6, have a 1-hour cocktail party to improve our intellectuality, and then dinner and discussion. And it's just been, and the guy who called me, would you like to be in a book club, Carl? And I said, geez, Martin, absolutely. Because I think too many times I can go 3 or 4 months, certainly in Orange County, and only had cocktail conversation, which is worthless. And to really get into a book and get the other guy's opinion, and interesting, talking to your wife, Linda, the same thing with her book club. What it really does is by the other people's choices, it broadens what you read. You wouldn't have picked that book yourself.
It gets you out of your comfort zone.
Totally.
So is there a book that you read in the last year or two that got you out of your comfort zone, that got you thinking about things in a little different way?
Certainly, as long as you don't ask me for titles.
Or authors, I know.
Yeah.
I finished the series, the Red Sparrow series. Of course, I can't remember the other 2 titles.
Yeah.
One of them was the Kremlin something or other. And don't ask me for the author's name, but I highly recommend those books.
Yes.
The Red Sparrow books.
I've read one.
Yeah. Well, the other 2 are waiting for you. So, all right. So, book club, keep being curious. And I think for the listeners on the show, of course, I mean, I applaud your curiosity. You are folks that are constantly looking for insights to do your job better, or to feel just sort of that you're in the right place. And since we're talking about books, I'm going to throw a couple at you that just happen to be they were in the September newsletter or August newsletter. But I read a lot this summer in the business books that I read. One was Clayton Christensen's Competing Against Luck, and basically it's his innovation theory and how the jobs to be done theory. I thought it was really, really interesting, and there's some great stories in there. Both in terms of companies that use jobs to be done as a theory, as well as sort of looking back at companies that didn't call it that, but it fit into his theory.
Now, you mentioned luck.
Yes.
How much of an influence is that in going towards success in your mind?
I'm a fan of Greg Norman's statement, the harder I work, the luckier I get. I think that... But
there's no doubt there's some uncontrollables up there.
There, no doubt, but
for all of us.
But, it's amazing how many successful leaders move from one organization to another and they're still successful. At that point, it's no longer luck.
Right, right.
It's skill. And I think
it's real management.
Yeah, and they're leaders. They build a team. They do certain things. And what Christensen talks about is how to take luck out of it.
Really?
Yes. And
does he go to church a lot?
No, I can't speak for his religiosity. So that was one book, and that I read that I recently enjoyed, and then a number of others on storytelling. But you'll have to go to the show notes for those books. So, well, Dad, I think the audience has gotten enough of the Neisser boys.
We've bored them silly, so let's go from here.
Yeah, so I'm so grateful for you all, as always, for sticking with us.
And listen, Andrew, thank you for putting me on. This has been fun. We've had a good time. Hopefully, we've espoused something of value.
Well, we'll certainly find out in the comments left on the show. So until next time, we'll be here. We'll be here in a week. Thank you for listening to episode number 100. For more interviews with innovative marketers, visit renegade.com/podcast and hit that subscribe button. Renegade Marketers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neisser. Hey, that's me. The show is produced by Melissa Caffrey, Laura Parkin, and our B2B podcast partner, Share Your Genius. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, or learn more about B2B branding, CMO huddles, or my CMO coaching service, check out renegade.com. I'm your host, Drew Neisser, and until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.